Yeah, thanks for having me. Thank you, Joe, for inviting me. I'll share what little I know. I'm not the best ham radio guy. I'm more of a prepper who, ham radio is one of the tools in my toolkit, and I have a few slides for you here to walk you through the basics of getting into working satellites. I try to keep things pretty simple and low level because there's a lot of this stuff you can get into and it seems overwhelming, and I guess in a way it is, but it's fundamentally fairly simple if you're used to ham radio at all. And I'll try to go through it kind of quickly because I know, since Joe invited me, there have been some things happening in the world. I think you'll have some questions about it, and I'll try to field things as best as I can. So let me share my screen here. All right.
We got you.
So sorry about that. Use a Mac, you got to give it permission for everything. So let's see. We'll share my desktop here.
There we go.
All right. Can you all see my desktop there?
Yep. Yes. Very good.
All right. So I call this Working Satellites for Dummies because I am a dummy, and so if I can do this, so can you. I'm, as he said, Josh Centers, KO4EMJ, Kilo Oscar 4, Echo Mike Juliet. You can read all my prepping stuff at unprepared.life. That's where I put my prepping content now, and I am a member of the Macon Area Ham Radio Societies. So if you're ever in the area, be sure to check us out. So a brief history of how I got into this. I was one of those guys that got into ham radio during COVID. I got my general ticket in June of 2020, so it's been a little over 3 years now I've been on the air. And I wrote an article for a place I used to write for called Unprepared about the limits of Baofeng radios. And the reason I wrote that article is because we had all these guys that would chime in and say, hey, I get my license, I get one of these little $30 radios, I can talk to China, right? I can talk to you anywhere in the world. And of course, as most of y'all know, that isn't true because Baofeng is VHF, UHF. Your effective range is, with a Baofeng, it's supposedly at 5 watts, not really, but you might get a mile out of it. And they just a lot of people outside of the ham radio space simply didn't understand the difference between those modes and HF. And so I wrote a quick article just clarifying that for the non-hams. Well, I had some hams comment on the article and say that, I wasn't being accurate, that you can actually communicate for hundreds of miles if you simply use a satellite repeater. And so I took that as a personal challenge and tried it out for myself. And I wrote an article that I have a link to there. And that's how Joe found me. I wrote about my experience using satellite repeaters. And the long story short of it, being that the original goal was, talking about emergency communications, working satellites is not a great EMCOM method. It's not something I would suggest that you could depend upon, like you might could on HF, or you might depend on your club repeater. But it's a neat tool to have in your toolkit, and it's a pretty fun side hobby in the ham space. So the basics of ham satellites, and this is one of those things, some folks make it really complicated, and it can be, but all you really need to know is that a ham radio satellite is a ham repeater, except it's in space and it's moving really fast. And I have a link here. You can get a full list of all the ham satellites that are in existence. Some of them are reachable, some of them are not. And clubs can launch their own satellites. I don't really know how that works. I guess, you get a big enough model rocket, you can get something in the low Earth orbit. I'm sure there's probably some permits or, something like that to go with it. I don't have any experience there. A notable example of a repeater on a satellite is the International Space Station. And some of our astronauts are ham radio operators, and sometimes they do get on the air. I've never experienced that. And there's some other satellites. SO50 is a really popular one. There's some different SO satellites that are constantly flying around the Earth, and they pass over at all different hours of the day. And I'll show you an app here in a minute that lets you track them. And so if this is something you get into, you might find yourself getting a notification on your phone and picking up all your gear and running outside at dinner time, like I was doing when I was researching for this article. And then your wife and kids are looking at you like, what the heck are you doing? And those hours shift throughout the year. For instance, the ISS, I think right now, it tends to pass over, at least where I'm at, in the evening, and other times of the year it might pass by at 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock in the morning. So it's constantly changing. It's something you constantly have to keep track of if this is something you're into. AMSAT is a great group dedicated to this sub-hobby. They have a link here in the presentation to what they call a beginner's guide. I have that in quotes because if you read it, at least for me, it's extremely technical. There's a lot of stuff about complex antenna builds and various things. And so if this is something you're really deep into, I would recommend checking that out. Tonight I'm just going to give you the absolute simplest way to get started. And so as I said, these ham radio satellites move very fast, and they're only in your airspace for a short amount of time. You might have it for a couple of minutes. You might have access to it for, and this is one of the things I like about SO50 is it stays there over where I'm at for around 10 minutes. So you get a little bit more time to work it. But, let's talk about why that is. So, a lot of us are used to, when we're using satellite communications, we're using things like, DirecTV, Dish, a lot of people have internet through Starlink now. And the way Starlink gives you constant, low latency internet access through satellite, it's pretty incredible. They have just a lot of satellites. They launch just dozens and dozens of satellites. And you may have seen this in the night sky. It's what they call the Starlink constellation. It's just a long string of low Earth orbit satellites in the air. And this is a neat visualization. In fact, here we go. You'll see that the Wikipedia has this nice interactive one here you can look at. It gives you an idea of like what all is floating around the Earth at any given time. So here we have the Iridium system. If you've ever heard of a satellite phone, these are the satellites that power Iridium. The ISS here, you see how fast they're moving, just moving very fast. Most ham radio satellites are kind of in that low Earth orbit. You got the Hubble here. Come out here, you have, of course, GPS. And you notice the further away they are from the Earth, the slower they appear to move. And GPS also, again, the reason you constantly have GPS access, no matter where you are in the United States, is because there's just a lot of satellites orbiting at any given time. You have GLONASS. Oops. GLONASS is the Russian equivalent of GPS. You have Galileo, which is the European equivalent of GPS, and you have BeiDou, which is the Chinese equivalent of GPS. And up here you have what they call the graveyard orbit. These are satellites that just kind of floated off into space and probably will never be heard from again. And the GPS thing is really interesting if things in the world do get hectic, because GPS is really easy to disrupt. It's a very weak signal. And there have been actually some places in the United States before where we believe the Russians have actually blocked GPS. So if stuff really hits the fan, GPS is probably one of the first things that's going to go. So apologies to the FT8 and JS call operators out there who are depending on that for their emergency comms. Let's full screen this again. Oop. So let's talk about what makes working satellites so interesting. The thing about, of course, they're in space, right? That's one thing that makes it really interesting. But what makes working satellites so interesting is that this is a highly mobile activity. This is a very fast-paced kind of thing. If you're more of an FT8 person and you're sitting there clicking, to get your contacts, this is much more active, very active. So now, as my critics at the Prepared correctly pointed out, you can make contacts over very long distances. In fact, I have a video attached to that article where I'm hearing from a guy in Houston, Texas, and I am in the middle of nowhere, Tennessee. So that's about 800 miles, something like that. It's a very long way away. And you do that because you're using this very far away satellite as your repeater. So they are very fast moving. As I said, these are low Earth orbit satellites. And as we saw in the animation there, they're close to Earth. Their apparent speed is very, very fast. They're just over your airspace for just a few minutes a day. Some of them pass over multiple times a day, but point being, you only get a few seconds or a few minutes. And they're very active, especially ISS. ISS is really fun to listen into. I don't recommend trying to make contact with it for a beginner, just because like it's getting hit. Like there are so many QSOs being sent out over ISS. Everyone wants to log in contact with the ISS. We talk about Starlink and GPS. So Starlink and GPS both have multiple satellites, cover the entire airspace at any given time. Another thing that makes working satellites interesting is an effect called Doppler shift. And in the simplest possible terms, that just means that the frequency that you listen on, the frequency you transmit to, changes ever so slightly as the satellite moves through the sky. So you have to be constantly adjusting your receive and your transmit frequencies to stay in contact with it. Also, because these satellites are moving, you have to aim your antenna. Ideally, you have a directional, which we'll talk about here in a second, but even if you're using you can use a rubber ducky, you can use a whip antenna, and you need to just constantly be aiming it at the satellite. Another interesting thing about satellites is they are crossband. If you're unfamiliar with crossband or haven't come across that term since your exam, basically it means that they transmit on UHF, receive on VHF. And there are some exceptions. There are some that receive on VHF and receive on UHF, transmit on VHF. There are some that are single sideband, which I won't get into here. And the reason the satellites use the crossband method is it extends the effective range of the satellite. That's how you're able to bounce a signal for so far. So what you need to get started is actually pretty simple. There's an app. It's for Android and iPhone. It's called ISS Detector. I'm not quite sure how people did this before they had this app, because it makes it so easy. I'm sure there's like charts and tables and things you can follow, but this makes it so much easier. And there's a small one-time in-app purchase to track amateur satellites. I think it's like $4 or $5, something like that. In my opinion, absolute essential, at least when you're getting started. And I can show that to you, hopefully, real quick. And we may have a satellite in the air right now. Give me just a second here. So let me get this working. Can you all see my iPhone screen there?
Yeah.
Awesome. All right, so I have ISS Detector. Well, it's the, when you have a live demo, this is always the danger, right?
Murphy's Law.
And it doesn't want to load. Okay. So anyway, this app, at least when it's working, it shows you all of the, you can pick the satellites you want to track, and it lists them. It gives you a notification when they're passing over your airspace. And it also has an augmented reality feature that I was hoping to show you that actually shows the satellite. Oh, there we go. Beautiful. So 709. So this one AO27 may still be in the air. Let's see. Okay, forgive my messy office here. So if you look on the left there, you see that little bubble, that little speech bubble thing. So it tells me which direction to point.
Oh, yeah.
And there it is. If I were outside right now, that's exactly where that satellite is at in the air. And then I can look at the transmitters here. It tells me the uplink is 145.850, and the downlink is 795. Let me see if I can pick anything up. Probably not. I'm inside right now. I'm not using a Yagi or anything fancy, so here, I got my Baofeng here, and this is generally like before I got the Yagi, this is just how I was doing it. I would just aim. I'm not picking anything, unfortunately. So that's really all you need to get started. Let me close out of that. So part of the trick is, because you're listening on VHF or UHF and you're transmitting on the other one, then you can only do one at once, right? So a simple way of workaround is on the Baofeng. Again, I'm just mentioning the Baofeng because people tend to have a lot of these. At my ham radio club, you know, a lot of us have like a whole like shoebox full of these things. If we get a guy who passes technician and he doesn't have a radio, we just hand one off to him and we're not going to miss it. You can do this with any handy talkie, really, and you can use the AB function to switch between your two frequencies. Of course, the unfortunate thing is it means you're either listening or you're transmitting. You can't do both, so it's a bit of juggling. If you want a duplex, you'll need you can use two radios at once. You can use one for listening and one for transmitting. That's a little awkward. Or you can get a crossband radio, which unfortunately there aren't a lot of those on the market that I'm aware of. It also helps to do this with your friends. You know, this might be a fun club activity if you have drive's not too far, and you know it's not passing by at 3 o'clock in the morning. You might have a satellite pass over during a meeting, and you all can run out and try to hit it real quick. So some more advanced gear you might want for this. A Yagi is super helpful, and if you don't already have a tape measure Yagi that you've built, it's a great ham club activity. The Macon Area Ham Radio Society, that was like one of the very first club meetings we had. We all got together, and some guys cut up some old tape measures, and we got some PVC pipe and made some tape measure Yagis, and those are very helpful for this. Also really helps if you have a radio that does crossband and repeat. Right now, the only one on the market that I'm aware of is the I can't pronounce this right, the Wuyun KG-UV9. Here I list the D. There are different variants, Chinese manufacturers, they make, a bunch of different models that are basically the same. It costs around 160 bucks. I've heard it's apparently not full duplex and VHF. I don't know if that's a major limiting factor. A lot of the radios that the hardcore satellite guys recommend are no longer produced. Apparently the cream of the crop is that Kenwood THD72 Alpha, and it's a pretty cool radio. It has GPS built into it, so you keep track of your coordinates, which, if you ever have to relay that by satellite or, somewhere else, that might be a really helpful thing to be able to access. I'm sure Joe will share this presentation with you, so we have this link. This one fellow made a spreadsheet of different models to look at for working satellites. Very nice list. I'll defer to him on that. So finally, I want to discuss, can you actually work satellites in an emergency? That's how I got into this in the first place, right? So it's apparently happened. I talked to a guy. His name's Clint Bradford, call sign Kilo 6 Lima Charlie Sierra, K6LCS. He runs a site called worksat.com, and he told me that you really shouldn't rely on this, but he knows of at least one case where it's been used successfully. For emergency satellite comms, so I wrote this article in 2021. About a year later, Apple introduced the iPhone 14. Has a feature called Emergency SOS, and it is a emergency satellite communicator, and it works very similarly to what I showed you here. You have to, when you activate it, you have to aim it in the sky, in the open air. You have to aim it at the satellite, and you can send just very short, brief messages to emergency services and to friends and family in your contact list. And it's apparently saved a lot of people's lives already. Most notably in the Maui fire we had recently. A lot of people used it for emergency comms there. There are dedicated satellite communicators like the Garmin InReach. They're kind of expensive. They have a monthly fee. Unless you're a serious hobbyist, you're out hiking, you're out in Death Valley a lot or something, I probably wouldn't invest in that. And then they have, of course, the Iridium satellite phones, which are really expensive. You'll spend anywhere between $600 to $1,000 on the phone itself, and the phones are pretty much technology from the 90s with a real big antenna attached. And then you'll pay something like $100 a month for service. They're expensive. I again wouldn't recommend it unless you just have a special need for it. If somehow you ever find yourself stuck out in the woods, having to work a satellite in an emergency, my very brief advice would be to just say emergency and then just shout out your GPS or your Maidenhead coordinates. Because again, lots of people are transmitting, lots of noise. You'll be lucky at all if you get through, but I think maybe if you shout emergency enough and share your coordinates, you might get lucky. But generally, I would not recommend it for emergency comms. All right, so that is what I have there. More than happy to take questions, comments, heckles.
Okay, one of the things about Josh, he's got a website, and Josh, I want you to share that website with everyone here. They're taking notes.
Yeah, absolutely. So let me see. I'll throw the URL in the chat, and I'll show it to you real quick. All right, so it's my little Substack. This is called Unprepared.life, and kind of a funny story about that. I stopped working for the Prepared, and well, then I was unprepared, right? So anyway, can we see that? So most recent article. This is actually relevant to the Israel-Hamas situation about community and the importance of community, especially for mutual defense. I talk about, you guys might remember back during the LA riots in 1991, there were what they call the rooftop Koreans. These guys who banded together to defend their businesses from rioters. They sent out a call over radio, over Korean radio in Los Angeles, and the Korean community showed up loaded for bear, armed to the teeth, and they got up on the rooftops and scared off the rioters. And some other ones that you might find interesting, start your emergency pantry for cheap. I give some tips there. They got these expensive food buckets, that have all kind of gross prepper food. You don't really need it. You can just go get some beans and rice from the dollar store and load up your own bucket. I have, hopefully we never need this, Nuclear War, Beginner's Guide to Survival. And this may be also relevant for the current situation. This is the first big article I did for Unprepared, was how to prepare for a Russian invasion of Ukraine. If you notice the date, this was a few days before that happened, so I was a bit ahead of the curve there. So yeah, lots of cool stuff there about emergency food, firearms, a little bit of ham radio stuff. I do write about the iPhone satellite communication thing. We cover all manner of preparedness topics.
Josh, as a ham radio operator, what would be the bare minimum for, let's say, 10 to 20 days of prepping? What should we have in stock at home for any emergency that arises?
So one thing you absolutely need to have water. Plan for a gallon per person per day, however much you can reasonably store. We keep about 15 gallons in our house we have 5 people in the house. Food is good. Beans and rice are a good standby. Canned foods are really good for shorter term emergencies because you can just open them, eat them. You don't have to do anything special for them. You definitely want to have a blackout kit, which is one of the things I cover. And if you're a ham operator, your blackout kit's going to be a little bit more advanced than a regular person. So for most people, I would say, have flashlights and batteries and things like that. Maybe a solar panel. So my prep kit for ham radio, my prepper radio for HF is I use the Xiegu G90. I like the G90 because it's a good mix of, doesn't drain the battery very much, but puts out about a good 20 watts, so it's pretty good balance. I use that. Use like an in-fed half wave you can throw up anywhere. I really like the BONO batteries. I have a 9 amp hour battery that I can charge via a solar panel. And, you know, with that set up, and I also I keep a Raspberry Pi in that kit along with backup batteries. So I can get on to like WinLinks and emails and get on to JS8 call and send text messages and to phones and other things. So that gives you a lot of optionality there. And I tend to, you know, I have one of the nicer Yaesu handy talkies for contacting the local repeater. You know, you should at least, you know, even if you're a cheap Battlefield guy like me, you should at least have like one decent radio in your kit, right? And then, you know, first aid kit, you definitely have a good first aid kit. You know, if you guys run an Aries group, a very good thing to have. My friend Tom actually runs you can look it up on Unprepared.live. I've reviewed his kits. He sent me like 3 or 4 of them, so I have a lot of kits on hand. And a fire extinguisher. That's one thing people always forget. Have a fire extinguisher handy, especially, you know, I don't know, too much of the magic smoke is released from your radio, and you have a bit of a flare up there. You know, always good to have I'll tell you another thing I love too, if I may. This is one of my favorite little radios. This is the Sea Crane Skywave SSB. This is kind of expensive for a receiver. I think I paid about 180 bucks for this. But what I love about this little radio, it's very portable. Lets you pick up, as it says, SSB, right? So 40 meters, 80 meters, can receive all that stuff, can receive AM, FM, weather, alerts, just about everything. Unfortunately, it does not do UHF. I was going to recommend it for listening on satellites, but it doesn't do that. But it is airband, it does weather. So, you know, very cool little radio, one of my favorites, comes in a nice little package.
So what got you started in prepping? Did you have an emergency situation, all of a sudden became interested, or what? Because you've been at this for quite a while.
Yeah, so what actually got me initially interested in it was a kid. I was like 11 years old. This was 1994. We had in Tennessee what they call the Great Ice Storm, and power was out for like a week at my house. It was out for weeks in other places. And so that always like instilled the importance of being prepared for situations. You know, thankfully we had gas heat, we had canned food. You know, we were fine, we were pretty comfortable. But you know, it's one of those things I never forgot. And then as an adult, so you know, having children, you know, I think being a dad makes you acutely aware of these things. And then the thing that really kicked it off for me was watching the Ferguson riots and just seeing just the total chaos that was happening there. And just something clicked in my head. I thought there's going to be a lot more of this. And unfortunately, I was right. And so, you know, we started working on a plan to move back here to the country. We have some chickens and rabbits and gardens and things like that. You know, have a little compound out here.
Josh, I can't thank you enough for being with. You're the first guy we've ever had on that talked about prepping and actually talked about satellites. So this has been a wonderful experience with you.
Awesome. I'm glad you enjoyed it.
Any questions?
Well,
Yep, we got a question. Hold on.
I don't have a question more than a statement for some of the guys that missed it. In space, what they do is they don't have a repeater. They have what they call a transponder. And instead of it retransmitting a particular part of the spectrum, it retransmits the entire spectrum. And then as far as the Doppler effect goes, what really happens there is there's a reverse tracking, so that as the transmitting frequency goes up as you're working the satellite, and the UHF side actually goes the opposite direction. So you have to have a radio that reverse tracks as you're following your transmit up or your receiver down. Your transmitter's going in the opposite direction.
Well, that's amazing. I didn't think the Doppler effect actually.
Okay, no, that's not the Doppler. The Doppler effect is basically if you're sitting in one spot and a car goes by and you hear that, that's the Doppler effect. Okay, which is a little bit different from reverse tracking when you're using a transponder for satellite work. I just wanted to point that out for the guys that weren't quite savvy to that, because this is a ham radio thing. So
yeah. Any other questions for Josh? No. Who's got a question for Josh? Pretty much set. Josh,
the other thing I wanted to point out was the thing that we used to use before we had all these fancy iPhones and shit was Kepler-line data. And you had to download the Kepler-line data every week or every day, and it would give you an arrangement of where the satellites were and where they were going to be.
I heard about that somewhere. Do they still do that now?
We still do it, yeah. And the other most popular satellite radio is a Yaesu FT 847. If you can get your hands on one of those, that's the shit right there, bud.
Yeah.
It's got reverse tracking, it does full duplex, everything.
Yep. That's a big radio though, isn't it?
No, it's a little one, it's only about that big.
It's not a handheld, it's a desk.
No, it's a little mobile radio. It's got
Yeah.
HF, VHF, UHF,
Right.
it's got everything in it.
What was that radio again?
FT 847. That was Yaesu's premier satellite radio back in like 92 or 93, I think it was. And they made that thing all the way up to 2008, I think it was.
Something like that.
Cadillac is the 9700.
Yeah.
9700 Yaesu?
No, the Icon 9700.
Icon 9700. Josh, have you heard of that one?
The ICOM 97?
Yeah, they're 12 grand, right?
Like 16.
No, new on me, but
Then we're not thinking about the same radio.
The 9700 was specifically, a lot of it was, it's a tri-band.
Tri-band?
2 meter, 70 centimeter, 23 centimeter, but it's got a
I know
satellite
which
motor
radio
on
you're
it.
talking about.
So it's got reverse tracking and all that?
All of it.
I'm sure it does.
Oh, I'm sure it does.
Almost $2,000 a piece, yeah.
2,000 bucks.
$2,000.
Yeah.
Holy mackerel.
Yeah. Too rich for me.
Any other questions? Prepping questions? Satellite questions? Anything at all? Josh, thank you so much. This has been an absolute honor having you here.
Awesome.
Yeah. Thank you so much. All right. Have a good night.
Thank you.